And I am really excited about our discussion today. I'm excited anytime we have an author, because I feel that the people that write books have really done some deep thinking and thought about a specific topic that makes them an excellent person to lead through our discussions. And today's topic is one that's not easy for any of us to think about. It's on death and dying and grief and remembering. And I'm really excited to welcome Carrie Boone, who's a licensed clinical social worker, to the stage. And she's also the author of Unbelievable Grief and Incredible Grace, which is a memoir, which leads me to believe that she's got a personal story behind this, because that's why people write memoirs. And so, Carrie, if you want to join us on stage, we will kick things off today. All right, Carrie, great to see you, and I'm really glad that we made this connection. Before we dive into your book, tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to your current role as an author and career path.
Sure. Good afternoon, Steve. Thank you so much for having me on, and greetings to everyone on this call. I know grief is a subject that a lot of us, tiptoe around, and so I'm excited to see that so many people are here to learn more, and also to learn and hear more about my story. My name is Carrie Boone. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm also a therapist and a certified grief professional.
Okay, excellent. Now, what led you to that profession, or is that going to be uncovered as we dive into your book?
That's a good question. It is recognized in the book, but ever since I was a child, I can remember just wanting to help people. I enjoyed helping people from childhood. I thought I was going to be a nurse, but that didn't work out too good. So I always knew that I wanted to be in the helping field. And so I just kept pushing until I found my calling, which was clinical social work.
Okay, great. And now, are you a private practice social worker, or do you work in a hospital, or what kind of setting, and what kind of settings have you worked in?
So I've worked in the medical social work field for a few years, and I currently do work at a community hospital. I also do independent contract work as a psychotherapist for a small agency in Baltimore City, Mind, Body, and Soul Counseling. Okay. And I also hold a certification as a grief professional.
Excellent. All right. Well, if it's okay with you, let's dive into the book. And one of the things that I found really helpful in these discussions with authors is to jump on Amazon, where your book is available. And I'm gonna, while it's top of mind, I'm gonna cut and paste that link into chat, and take a peek at your table of contents here. And so first off, we've got a dedication and introduction, and I do want to hear your story, but I want to give folks a glimpse of some of the chapters that hopefully we can walk through here today in our discussion. But before we kind of dive into the book, would you care to share sort of your inspiration for doing this? And
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. So my dad, the book is written in memory of my dad, who was an amazing role model in my life. He had been there for everything that I encountered in life. And the book takes you on a journey through my childhood grief experience all the way through adulthood. Yep, that's him. It was his loss in 2021, his death from a motor neuron disease called ALS, that took me on a journey of emotional despair. And so I wrote this book because of his memory, and to be able to help others who have experienced what I call an unbelievable grief.
Great. Okay. So let's see, how about I jump back to that page there, and maybe this can give us a guide for discussion. And I would also sort of say, to remind our audience, feel free to jump in on this if you've got questions or comments for Carrie. If you've got something you'd like to share, you can throw it into chat or the Q&A. But whoops, oh boy, that's not the right button to press. Okay, so let's take a look here. And you one of the first chapters here, you talk about grief in childhood. What is that personal grief, or is that something that you've encountered with your clients, or how does that chapter kind of flush itself out?
Okay, yeah. So the chapter about grief in childhood is simply a transparent look into my grief experiences beginning as early as the age of 8. And so this book will explain how I was introduced early to grief, even, as a child, and seeing cousins and friends and loved ones pass and being taken to their services and different things like that. And so that grief in childhood, it talked about how I even learned to appreciate the grief process because of one major point. And that was, it did show me how my family and friends, we all came together after the loss. And in my culture, we have a repast, right? That's where everyone gathers and has fine foods and just loving on each other and eating and just, supporting one another. So that was the one positive takeaway that I, concluded as a child.
That's great. And as I reflect on that, I think how we're introduced to grief, death, and dying at a young age, it probably carries through with us our lifetime. And the fact that you had that positive experience is you're very fortunate. I think, if I think about that, there's grief with death or dying. There's grief where your best friend in elementary school moves away. There's grief when you have to give up something that you're used to. Any sort of insights on that, as we kind of move through the world and maybe deal with grief at an older age, and we wonder why we're reacting these ways.
And you bring up a very good point. So the repast was one of the positive things that I pulled from the grief process from an early age. However, there were other, I guess, things that I learned about hurt and pain. And I also learned suppression. And so the book will talk about how I thought that my early childhood experiences had prepared me for grief going forward in life, and how I was absolutely wrong. And I was wrong because I had learned how to suppress my emotions over the years. So to me, that was coping. This particular loss illuminated and shed light on the hole that I had in my tool coping box.
Yeah.
Because the suppression was no longer effective.
As a therapist, my gut level feeling is that, most of your clients, what not associated with grief or anything like that, is one of the things that we're all challenged with is suppression, is that it's holding our feelings in, whether it be grief or emotion, or, I shouldn't express myself. As a man, sometimes it's sort of like, hey, I shouldn't be crying. That's not manly, and ways that we sort of reflect on that. Now, what did you call the services again that you, I missed the term that you used. You grew up and celebrating life, the celebration,
the repast.
repath. So
Yes.
is there anything like share with us a little bit of, I've never heard that term. So
Sure.
is there anything different about the repath, or I like the term, number one.
Yeah, so the repast is a term to describe a gathering that a family or a group of folks has after a loss. And so we would gather at one of our family members' homes, and all of the family and friends would come there and just, eat and fellowship and talk about memories about the deceased. And, from that, I learned that, okay, I'm losing someone, but now I get to enjoy this, this kind of family reunion, so to say,
Great.
with the repast.
Great. Excellent. Okay, so let me jump back to the table of contents here, and let's take a peek at some of the other chapters. We don't need to go through every chapter, but it looks like, we start with origins, grief and childhood, my soul anchored, interpretation, legacy. Any sort of thoughts that you want to share on any of the first chapters as we move through the book?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to talk about my soul anchored, because my spirituality has played a major point in my grief process, and in my life. And so my soul anchored talked about my early introduction to, my religious practices and being a Christian and singing on the choir and all of those things. And I brought that into the book because I thought it was important to recognize the importance of spirituality when you're going through a grief, and how that either helps you cope or helps you or someone else in your family cope. It's a pretty important guiding factor in how you'll cope and what coping strategies you will utilize, whether it's prayer, having a prayer service or reading the Bible, whatever your practice is. I felt like my spirituality was very important to recognize in my book.
Great. And, I think that's really important. And as we grow older, it's been shown that people are more committed to their faith as they grow older. But I think it's also important to note that there's lots of different ways to express faith and express ourselves that don't necessarily need to be formally religious based for folks that are out there, but
Right.
using a faith-based approach as a guide can sometimes be helpful. So if you or your loved one is in the audience and you aren't going to a church, or you're not necessarily praying, or you've got other things, is think about things like nature, or a particular activity, or a group of friends that you can sort of replicate the experience that that Carrie is talking about.
Yes.
Great. Okay, so let's see. Our next chapter here is interpretation and legacy and protector. Any sort of thoughts there?
Yeah. So in interpretation, I basically lay out more in-depth information from a clinical perspective on what grief is, what those nuances are, the physiological symptoms, the physical and the emotional, because grief is multifaceted. It's not just I'm feeling sad. You have physiological changes in your body, lack of appetite. You can have a lack of sleep, those different things. You can have depression. And so I wanted to kind of explain to the reader, because not everyone is a clinician that's reading this book, that, hey, you too may be experiencing grief if you are having these symptoms. And so then I went on to legacy, where in that chapter, I kind of just talk about my dad and his contribution to his life and the community, and what his legacy left behind, the lessons that I learned from him. And some of the things that I, still recall today and teach my own children as a part of his legacy.
Great, great. Yeah. So, I like the fact that you're addressing kind of the clinical aspects, being a social worker and what have you. And oftentimes I will, when I'm talking to somebody who's grieving, it's sort of like, they're looking for a magic wand.
Mhm.
And I'm assuming you don't have that magic wand, which
I
is sort of,
don't. I
hey,
don't.
look, it's going to be okay. You're going to stop feeling this way or what have you. And
Yeah.
it's, I mean, any sort of thoughts on how to gain perspective of,
Mhm.
I mean, sometimes what I'll compare or I'll share with people is, uh, get them to talk about other things that they lost,
Mhm.
perhaps a dog or, like I said earlier, a friend, it's, and it's the saying, time heals all wounds
Mhm.
can hold true, but
Yeah.
there's things that we can do that can help us through this process.
Right. And you bring up a good point. A lot of folks, even myself, going through the grief process, I just wanted it to not be so hard. I actually never wanted my dad to be gone, but we all know that that's not a reality, right?
Mhm,
And what I encourage folks to do initially is to actually lean into what they are feeling. A
mhm,
lot of times people avoid or evade the grief process, but the truth of the matter is you can run, but you can't hide.
mhm,
And a lot of times we try to avoid the grief, but what happens is because our body and our brain remembers trauma, because grief is a type of emotional trauma, it eventually will come back to be addressed. And it may be at a time that's not most convenient for you, like at your daughter's wedding or at your son's graduation. So I always encourage clients, and I take time with them, of course, because we are all in a different space, a different process of grief in our journey. And we're allowed that to, individuality, to lean into it, accept that the loss has happened, accept that this hurts, accept that it may feel like it's not fair,
yeah,
accept that you are angry, like accept and bring to the present moment your actual feelings. And once you do that, once you're mindful and you are present with those feelings, then you can kind of like break them down one by one. But
mm,
it definitely takes time. Unfortunately, there is no grief wand. I wish I had one because I would rather, I'd rather sit here and just, try to make things go away. But
mm,
the truth of the matter is it is a process and it takes time. There's no time limit. I can't tell you it's going to take 2 days, 3 days, 2 years, 4 months. You just have to let it play out in your life.
yeah. No, great thoughts there. And again, this is all subject to your interpretation too. It's is how we've
Yes.
dealt with grief before. Now, Deborah has a great question, or something for us to all talk about. And Deborah says, the anticipatory grief associated with Alzheimer's and dementia may be quite unique, as this may be present for people many years before somebody passes away.
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
if and she comments, I feel that if I leaned into grief, I would no longer be an effective caregiver. This great, thank you, Deborah, number one, for sharing those thoughts. And Carrie, I'm interested in your thoughts, but I want to say to the entire audience, if you've got ideas and solutions and things that may help Deborah, throw them into chat there. I see we got Ken Silverstein, who's with the Friends Club in Bethesda, which is a group of people, of men with memory loss. So many times we all have resources that might help each other. So I'm just throwing that out. But any thoughts on,
Oh, yeah,
for
absolutely.
Deborah?
Thank you, Deborah, for that amazing comment. So the comment I made about leaning into the grief was for someone who had already passed, not the anticipatory grief. However, I love that you brought that up because in my book, oh my goodness, there's this whole segment about anticipatory grief. as you have heard earlier, my dad was diagnosed with a motor neuron disease that was deemed terminal, ALS. And so what happened to me and my family is we, like you with dementia and your family member, we went down that road of anticipatory grief. And I tell you, it is so eye-opening. I had never gone through anticipatory grief before that I can remember in my life. And so actually grieving a person's loss before it actually happens is a true concept. So yeah, that part about leaning into it, that was for someone who's already transitioned. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, and again, you know, Deborah, my heart goes out to you and all folks that are dealing with dementia and
Yes,
Alzheimer's. And
yes,
but one of the things that you can reflect on here is that none of us have a crystal ball. None of us know our path. I mean, at all. But one of the things is that the sudden unexpected death of somebody has its own set of challenges. And while, you know, getting help and talking to people and giving yourself time to prepare, I hope there are some thoughts and solutions for you. So Margie says anticipatory grief is indeed real. I found it's helped me in losses as I can do some emotional preparation. It doesn't cancel the grief, but it mitigates it. So thanks.
that's right.
Thanks for
Good point.
sharing that,
And
Margie.
yeah,
Okay. And one of the things that I like, I love about these discussions that we have, it's just a reminder that none of us are alone, that, you know,
right.
that there is a community, that there are people that are here to support us. And so hopefully we can all share things that make each of us feel better and prepare. Okay. You know, when you were talking about legacy, the chapter on legacy, I think one of the things that's really important for all of us to think about is in advance of we all of us are going to leave this planet at one point or another. And the more that we can all sort of think about our legacy, it can help us while we're here, but it can also help our loved ones. And it gives us opportunities to talk about the things that mattered. And it could be like last week we did a thing on possessions where you are taking pictures of your stuff and telling stories about it so that your family knows about them in advance of us passing away. But okay, so we've got through we got the protector, gifts, and who any of those chapters that you wanted to share some insights on?
Yeah, so I'll talk about Ahu because that was where my life began to change dramatically. And not that it was just about me, but that was when my dad revealed what he had learned from his medical team, which was the diagnosis of ALS. And when I say Ahu, there's in that chapter, I'm actually discussing the dialogue between myself and my dad and his revelation of some illness that I'd probably heard, you know, in the past by working in the hospital, but not paid attention to it, right? So he said, you know, they think I have ALS. And my first response was, Ahu? Like, what is that? And so that pretty much describes, you know, what he had been going through, the multiple testing that he had to endure, the multiple doctor's visits, specialists, you know, going here, getting this done, the lab work, and kind of our beginning of hope that we expressed. Like, okay, my dad, I'll give a little bit of background about my dad. He was very physically fit. He was a professional power lifter. And so he had competed ever since I can remember, since a little girl. I remember holding on to his biceps, being taken up the stairs. So he ate healthy, he exercised every other day, he worked out, he had a home gym that he had put together on his own. I mean, he was just so physically fit. There was no way in the world anyone could have told me that my dad at the age of 68, not looking his stated age at all, would not be here today. And so that's what the chapter Ahu is about.
And you know, this is in parallel to some of the comments that we've had about dementia and Alzheimer's, is that I think so many times we wake up and we learn that either ourselves or our loved ones have this disease or disorder or health condition, and it's sort of like the reality hits us, and for the first time ever, we're doing research on something that we never in a million years thought was going to happen to our family or us as individuals. And I think, you know, probably, Carrie, this anticipatory grief, the process started for you when he told you that. I mean, you're fighting, and we're all, you know, we're going through chemo, we're doing all the treatment, but actually, I think if we all really reflected back, is that the grief process starts there, and we're fighting against it, because that's what gives us hope, you know?
Yes, I totally agree with what you're saying. That is absolutely true. As soon as I heard the 3 letters, ALS, I remember physiological changes happening. Like I began sweating and my heart started pounding, because I'm like, well, wait a minute, hold on. Okay, calm down. You know, anxiety took over. But then as, like you mentioned, as I researched more in depth, because now ALS had hit my door, I researched more and more. I'm watching YouTube videos about what ALS is. I'm going on WebMD and, you know, the ALS clinics here in Maryland. I'm just doing all of this research, and then I'm reading about the prognosis, and I'm like, oh no, this is a terminal illness. So of course, naturally, as a human being, anxiety takes over. I am now anticipating everything. I'm anticipating his decline. I'm anticipating, what are we going to do without him? I'm anticipating what will, I mean, even before it happened, I mean, and I'll say that they gave a prognosis, not to him specifically, but the prognosis after diagnosis for ALS is primarily 3 to 5 years is what they're saying. But to me, he went within a year of diagnosis. And so I didn't even get a chance to actually experience that literature part that they were saying, you know, you have 3 to 5 years. So I'm like, okay, I'm anticipating I have 3 to 5 years to, you know, settle things, do things that we've never done before, you know, things like that. So the anticipation of everything, and then the grief that goes along, the guilt that goes along with anticipating someone's death is just really emotionally awful.
Yeah. And I think that it's, you know, again, to help folks that might be out there in a similar situation, as I'm sort of reflecting on your words in this discussion, it's, since none of us have a crystal ball, and, you know, I could go out today and be in a car accident and I'm done. It's, you know, sometimes these diagnoses, they give us an opportunity to reflect, and it's, I know it seems like it's, you're being paralyzed, but it's there whether it's a year, a month, or 6 years, you know, having that time to prepare and spend time, as opposed to the losses that many of us have suffered when it's just immediate and you get that phone call. Okay, and I'm probably not articulating this. I'm just trying to, you know, sort of reflect on some of the things you're saying. Okay, so we've got
You're doing great.
Yeah, so let's see, where are we at here? Ahu, Omega, 2022. Any sort of topics here that you want to elaborate on?
Yeah, so definitely we can talk about 2020. I like talking about 2020 because in the book, because it's so relevant we actually all in this entire world went through a global pandemic. And so in those couple of chapters, I talk about the impact that it had on not only my dad, my family. There was a time where his condition declined so much far that we had to enlist home health. And I think back to how anxiety provoking that was for my dad, because everyone was afraid to get COVID. And so his primary thought was, I don't want to bring anyone into the house because they may have, the virus. And so we went through that, and I talk about the lockdowns and me being considered an essential worker and still having to, go to work, then rush to my parents' home to try and help as much as I could, and wearing PPE with the mask and the gown, in my parents' house. I mean, it was just so traumatic of a time to actually be going through a loss. And then I eventually talk about how a lot of folks weren't able to hold memorial services for their loved ones around the world because of the pandemic, and how my dad, because I'm a clinical social worker, it was, in me to do an advanced directive with him. And one of his wishes was, I want a service back home. He was originally from Hartwell, Georgia, which is a small town. And so even the anxiety surrounding us having to travel to a state where the numbers were astronomical for COVID, and the anxiety that caused, having to travel, but to also honor his wishes, was definitely interesting going through that as well.
Yeah, I want to back up on something that you said, because I think this will be a particular interest to our community members. And it's in alignment with grief and sort of that waiting game. But you had mentioned that you had hired a home care provider. Tell us a little bit about, so he gets a diagnosis with ALS, he begins to have health care changes. Tell us when you reach that intersection where the support that you, your family, and your network was unable to provide it, where you needed to look at paid caregivers, and how you made that decision.
Absolutely. And that's a very good question, especially for individuals who have elderly persons that you're caring for. In my work at the hospital, I often advise on these things, but in this situation, I became the actual person having to navigate the systems. And so my perspective was definitely appreciative. So my dad, I remember taking him to a support group, an in-person support group with the ALS Foundation that I discovered. One of the social workers there, who was phenomenal, introduced me to her support group, and we went, and he was able to walk with a cane at that time. He had a boot on one of his feet because he had foot drop. And from that time, from the moment we went to the support group, he began to decline even further, even faster. I mean, he lost his ability to stand on his own. My mom and I, we had to transfer him from like bed to chair, commode, etc. We eventually had to get a hospital bed that we were able to get from the loan center from the ALS Association, a bedside commode that they loaned us, and a chair raiser. And most of you have heard of like these electronic chairs that help you from a sitting position to a standing position, because he had lost all of his motor abilities in his legs. And so he soon was losing his ability to hold like a fork and spoon. He was not able to grasp eventually, because with ALS, it takes away your ability to like, your motor neurons are affected. So you can't walk, you can't move your limbs as you would, and you lose your ability to breathe on your own. So it was at that point when he lost his full mobility that we said, okay, my mom is elderly. She can't keep transferring him. She can't keep, pulling on him. We need to get some help in here. And so because of my knowledge of the source book, thankfully, and other, resources in the community. I was able to call and interview a few companies and get an interview with one of the providers. They came out to the home, did an interview with us, assessed our needs, and then started services.
I'm really glad that you shared that experience, because I know it resonates with a lot of people in the audience, and we'll get back onto the talk of grief, but this really does impact it too, is that because it's a steady, slow, when we see the steady, slow decline of our loved ones, it changes. This is not how we want to remember them. We want to remember Dad as the power lifter. But you brought up another very important topic, and quite honestly, we could do a whole hour of it about it, and we should. It's that when physically taking care of our loved ones, we cannot do it anymore. You had mentioned that your mom, her strength and health of lifting a power lifter and transferring and things like that.
Yes.
He could be the one put in the hospital. She could be the one that's disabled, taking care of your dad. And we need to come up with solutions to protect the caregiver. Now,
yes.
The other thing that you brought up was that you went to the ALS and they had a loan closet, and you were able to get some medical equipment through them.
Yes.
Number one, I want everybody, like, if your loved one has ALS, Parkinson's, dementia, reach out to these organizations that support those diseases, because did you find that there was some sort of hidden secrets that you may have not known about, and you could have gone and purchased a several $1,000 bed, and you may have been able to get that at a more affordable rate. Am I correct, Carrie?
That's true, because they actually loaned it to us for his entire time that he was here. And all of the equipment, the hospital bed, the chair raiser, the bedside commode. We were working on a BiPAP machine that they were trying to get for him. So reach out to any of the organizations that are available to have, for Alzheimer's, different diseases, muscular dystrophy. They all have like different organizations. Reach out to them. All I did was ask.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh yeah, we have this, we have a support group. I mean, he really enjoyed that when we went. Unfortunately, by the time we were going to go to the next one, he was homebound. The pandemic had hit, and they were doing virtual sessions. So that kind of still worked out, because he was able to still, participate. But he really enjoyed like the camaraderie of hearing about other individuals who were going through different types of ALS, but, still going through this disease.
Yeah, support groups are so helpful for, especially, for caregivers, but also for the person going through the health care challenge. Now, out of curiosity, I'm not trying to dig into, Dad's financial situation, but were these was the loan through that program, was it based on income, or was it just a program that ALS had?
Good question. So for this particular situation, they didn't ask for any income information. They just, hey, we have the equipment available, or when we get it in, we'll give you a call. There were times where I had to wait for like the chair to come in because somebody else was using it. And I want to also encourage caregivers to actually utilize care services because of caregiver burnout. I know that was one of the things that my mom and myself, not me particularly, because my mom was there all the time. So I noticed that she was running into some symptoms of caregiver burnout. That was another red flag to, hey, we got to get some help in here, you know. And so I want to encourage others.
This is, again, another topic that we talk about on a weekly basis on these discussions is that and you're in the middle of pandemic, and nursing and rehab centers have the biggest black eye that they've ever had in the history that I've known. Was there ever a point where somebody said to you and your family, look, your dad, he's losing his mobility. You need to consider him moving to a nursing and rehab center. was that a choice that you and your family had to go through?
So we didn't have to go through that particularly per se, because he had the support. We had gotten everything together. We were able to come together as a family and do it. It was very difficult, I will say. So they hadn't mentioned a nursing facility just yet, because I think they looked at how he had the supports, and, you know, we were all working together, my siblings and I, making sure, because one of his wishes was, I do not want to ever go into a nursing facility. So we did everything that we could to try to honor his last wishes. We did, what I will say is we did experience some inconsistencies in the home health providers. We had call outs. We had changes in providers and no communication. So I also want to encourage the listeners and family members, if you're going to be looking for these types of services, that this is something that you might expect. You know, a lot of people were afraid, a lot of people working in the medical field were afraid to go into people's homes because of the pandemic. And, you know, we all understood that, but however, we were still going through with needing a lot of help, actually. So those are some of the things that might come up for you if you are searching for, you know, private pay home health or any type of home health.
Yeah, that I'm really glad that we went down this rabbit hole, because it's what you're sharing is a real life experience that thousands of people go through, and it's
Yes.
not disparaging. We haven't named the agency, but it doesn't matter what the name of the agency is. They're all dependent on that worker who they've assigned to your house being there on time and providing good care. And agencies do an awful lot to screen, but it's sort of like when you get that phone call from mom and she's like, where is the person that was supposed to be here?
Yes.
It's thinking about a backup plan. You know, what's our backup plan? Okay. And preparing for that. The other thing that I think your family rallied around, which is admirable, and it's, you know, dad said, hey, look, I don't send me to a place, which I can tell you there's dozens of people in the audience they've heard their parents say that too. Your family had the ability to rally around and meet dad's wishes, and you made it work. And that is amazing, because the in-home care, it does take a support network.
It does.
You know, so this is a great example. And I would also say to folks in the audience who, when mom and dad say, don't send me to a place, that, you know, there are situations where mom and dad are not safe. They're not in a good place at home because they didn't have the support that Carrie is talking about, and having those conversations that, you know, look, we're going to do X, Y, and Z because this is what's best. And including mom and dad in that choice because they're adults. So I know I'm babbling here, but these are really important topics, and they're on the timeline that we go through when we have health problems and somebody is and we're all grieving through this time too, which earlier in the discussion, I think Margie said, it's like, holy cow, yeah, this can be paralyzing, doing all this caregiving stuff and sort of thinking about the future can be challenging. Let me go back. Wow. Okay, we got what a great discussion today, and we've looks like we've got about 10 minutes or so. So let's make sure that I want to make sure that we glance at the table of contents and see if there's any sort of topics in the book that you want to make sure that we address before our time is up today.
Yes. One of my favorite chapters to write was the chapter on help for the helper. Help for the helper. In this particular chapter, I, in a very transparent way, it's probably the most transparent I've ever been, talk about my journey with seeking mental health services for myself, like grief services for myself during this awful time. You know, I know the techniques to use. I know the interventions that I recommend to, my population, which is the adult population I work with. But it was something inside of me that was like, oh, you don't need to get help. But there was also the despair that I felt from the loss and the anger and the insomnia, the sleep disturbance that I experienced from this traumatic loss. To me, it was traumatic. So in this particular chapter, I discuss how it's okay for the helper to receive help.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah.
your mom, like, I love the fact that you came to this awareness, because it's probably easier for us all to kind of just hold it inside and feel like we got to be strong. So the fact that you got help, but I'm curious how your mom processed and handled what was going on with dad through this period of time.
Yeah, and definitely trying to be a support to her, whom, they have been married for decades. And now her best friend, husband, companion, significant other is no longer there. And so even having to, guide her through her own, healing process was definitely interesting. So I thought that was very important to mention in the book. Like, okay, I help people, but guess what? It doesn't mean that I don't ever need help.
Exactly.
So yes, the helper does need help.
It's great that you shared that. And one of I this is a very nice note from somebody in chat, and I want to read it because I think it's got a couple of things here that are very important. It says, your anticipatory grief resonated with me. I lost my dad in April of 2020 due to prostate cancer, and after being told he had 6 months to a year to live. Your book title was so appropriate. My journey was unbelievable. I did not write a book, but I did get an essay published in a book of anthologies. I was inspired to write about it, how one can find a bright spot after loss. Congrats on your book and interview opportunities. As a Latina and grief educator, I'm inspired to see another woman of color involved in your work, and I just ordered your book. And I think Carrie, and just out of confidence, I didn't read the name of the person that wrote that, but one of the reasons I like having authors on these discussions is you've given this deep thought to this specific topic. And did you find it therapeutic in terms of just writing these feelings down as opposed to expressing them verbally or just thinking about them?
Yes, and first I want to say thank you to the beautiful person that just came forth with that beautiful comment. I am so inspired. Thank you so much for your journey and sharing that with us. Thank you for being a light to this world and an educator in this very difficult topic to discuss. And thank you for joining me, or maybe joining you in this journey of helping others get through the grief process. And thank you so much for that. That means so much to me. I'm sorry, Steve.
Oh yeah, no, that was great. I think, but putting this, when you decided to put this down on paper, like whether it be as what I just read, writing an essay, a poem, a book, that process can be therapeutic. And actually, to those in the audience, we've been talking about anticipatory grief. It may be, playing around with writing your thoughts down, because I think that can be one helpful solution. Everybody's different. It might be making a recording,
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Before I penned the first line of this actual book, I actually had started journaling about my grief journey before I even came to the book. I was able to go back and kind of reread some of my journals that gave me some of the content for what's inside of the book. And so journaling is such a powerful tool. It allows us, it allowed me, and still does, to ground my thoughts. Now everything is not stuck up here. It is out so I can see it, so I can process it. I'm able to read today how far I've come. I call it growth and grief, right? Where I couldn't sleep, rolling around on the floor in grief pangs. My growth, I'm sleeping, I'm eating. You can recognize how far you've come, and then you can also see how far or where you need to be going forward. And so journaling, I encourage it. I have a list of coping strategies in the back of the book, and journaling is one of them. I even have journaling prompts for the reader if they've never journaled before. I have people that tell me, I've never journaled before. So I have prompts that say, this bothered me today about the loss. And you can just write a whole page about that. So different coping strategies. There's also a journaling section in the back of my book for the reader. I've had folks say to me, I read your book and I can't wait to get home to finish writing my journal entry about my feelings today. And so not only is it just a memoir or a account of what a mental health professional went through, but it's also a kind of like self-help guide to kind of like give you some cookie crumbs along the way in your grief journey. Also wanted to mention that I do have a website where I have blog interviews and insightful and encouraging words. It's www.inspirationbycarrie.com. And please check it out.
Yeah, let me, I'm gonna put this in the chat for everybody, and just to remind everybody that it's the chat will be recorded along with the recording of this discussion on our website. Let's see, Joanne or Deborah says, thank you for defining the term anticipatory grief. I'm facing the death of my cat, my only
I'm so sorry.
support. And again, when somebody says that, there's, I mean, especially for solo agers, we're actually going to do a discussion in April on pets and how we remember our pets and put them in our advanced care planning. But she brings up the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of grief, and let me just share that on the screen the best that I can here. I just did a quick Google search, but do you address the Kubler-Ross stages of grief in your book at all, or have you ever used that with your clients?
Oh, yes. So a lot of the current grief theologians are talking about how outdated the model is. However, I still respect the model because it was one of the first that we were introduced to let us know what we were actually feeling when a loss occurred. So I still use it widely. In my book, I definitely talk about the anger, the denial that my dad had was very frustrating to me, because there was one point where the doctors told him that he would no longer drive his car that he had just bought in retirement, right? And he would say to me, I'm not getting rid of my car, I'm going to drive it again. So the denial, even, after the physician said to him, you have to give up your keys, he still was just like, oh no, I'm going to drive again. But like you had mentioned earlier, Steve, it was his hope that was driving this denial, the hope that he would somehow become stronger and then be able to drive his car again.
And that's a form of grief right there. I mean, it's giving up the car keys. And I have to say, I use this Kubler-Ross grief cycle in all decision making in the back of my mind. So for example, when you're over here on the top of this ledge on the left-hand side, that's where you are. And then over to the right-hand side where it says acceptance, that is sort of the goal that we have at the end of any decision or life challenge that we're going through. And actually, what we all think is going to happen is we are going to go straight from this side to that side. That's referred to as the should line, what should
Yeah.
happen. But this, if you look at almost every decision, going to a new school, a divorce,
Mhm.
moving to a senior living community, what I don't care what you put in there, it generally follows this this grief.
Trajectory.
Yeah. Um,
Mhm.
let's see. Somebody, Joanne says, great discussion. I'm too a retired social worker. My husband was diagnosed with terminal illness 6 years ago and died in 2020 during the pandemic. I started listening to some of these discussions. It was reassuring to him that I was prepared for the future. I cannot even begin to express how much we learned from the discussions, and it helped anticipatory grief. Thank you. I'm glad. I mean,
Thank
aren't
you.
these discussions awesome? I mean, like, think about
They
today.
really are.
I fully came here just prepared to be, focused on grief, but we've talked about a million different things from, pet care to home care,
Yes.
and it makes
Self-care.
like you're not alone, Um,
Yeah.
so man, this is great. And we burned through an hour here. Carrie, my hats are off to you for the way that you and your loved ones cared for your dad and honored your dad. And I think that it's wonderful that you put this down and you shared it. And most importantly, that you're brave enough and willing enough to come on with me and talk about this very transparently. I think it's an inspiration for everybody, and it really it certainly helped me, and I think it helps other folks in the audience as well.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story. And I know my story is not the only story, but I'm also thankful for the insights of everyone here. And I see all of the amazing comments. It's just incredible. Thank you so much
You bet.
for the presentation that you have offered to the community members and this time and space for people to reflect as well.
I love it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Carrie. And thank you, everybody, for your participation, and especially those that shared their personal stories. And we hope that this helped a little bit. But we know that we're all going through tough times, and but hopefully coming together like this was a little bit helpful. So all right. Carrie, thanks so much. I'll get
Thank
this
you.
up later this afternoon. And folks, we will see you at the next discussions in February.
Thank you.